and connected jobs that you need to support manufacturing, like infrastructure development, also high-wage jobs that we need to invest in so that we can put America back to work.
Well, tomorrow night on this floor, the President of the United States will be here for his State of the Union address. He's already signaled that he's going to talk about the innovation economy, that's the education, the research. He's going to talk about infrastructure, and he's going to talk about creating jobs, making it in America. So as we prepare for that, I noticed our colleague from the great state of Texas has joined us. Please.
Thank you very much, the gentleman from California, and I want to add my words of appreciation for having the opportunity to join you tonight and to join the minority whip, still my majority leader, Mr. Hoyer, who coined the phrase as we were beginning to speak to the American people of how important it is for us to go back to our roots. And I'm delighted to be able to be here with gentlemen from Minnesota, gentlemen from New Jersey, gentlemen from New York. But I want to spin it in a different way. I want us to reclaim America's genius. I could go back, of course, to the Model T, or maybe even to Thomas Edison with the light bulb. There is an excitement about being able to build, create, and invent. Frankly, when I came to the Congress, I wondered why we were not making submarines anymore. As you well know, we had a shipbuilding industry in Virginia and, of course, in Mississippi. Because genius also is part of building. You must have the kind of technology, the kind of expertise to make it the best equipment you possibly can have. And that's what I sense that we have lost. And there's an excitement when young people can be part of the genius of America. I come from Houston, Texas, and we are one of the new starts in light rail. We've been trying to get there for about 30 years. We're just about there, where we would be on the precipice of funding for light rail. But at the same time, as we talk about putting tracks down, there's a technology of the new light rail cars. We need to, in fact, build those cars here in the United States. Many people view Houston as the energy capital of the world. You don't know that we have wind and solar headquarters or businesses that are headquartered in my congressional district. The point is, of course, is that the turbines, unfortunately, are not built here. So my point is, when the President so appropriately makes the point about investing in America and also building infrastructure, he is speaking the language of capturing the genius of America. And I would just hold this up because I think this is an example of where we're going. We're going onward and upwards. The red is the past administration where no jobs were created, or maybe a minimum of 1 million. We can see we've had some hard times. We don't ignore the fact that we've been in a hard recession. But look where we're going. How can we go backwards? How can we not create more jobs? And so we in Houston would really like to be part of not sending out tax dollars overseas, but we want to be able to build buses, rail cars, ferry boats, submarines, and large-size ships, if you will, because that is capturing the genius of America. So let me thank the gentleman for yielding, and I'm hoping the President will indicate to us that he is going to go forward in his investment to Mr. Hoyer and to all that are here on the floor for investment in infrastructure and recapturing the genius of America. I yield back to the gentleman. I really do thank you for allowing us to participate.
Thank you so very much, and indeed, if it's our tax dollars, it ought to be used to buy things that are made in America. We're going to do a lightning round here. We've got about 6 minutes, and we've got about 5 of us. Mr. Hoyer,
I'll try to take a minute. Let me say what I think is so good about this agenda, Make It in America. It is an agenda that, unlike some, brings us together and doesn't divide us. From left to right, Republican, Democrat, people all over this country understand that if we're going to be a great country, as we are today, and we're going to remain so in the future, it will be because we continue to be a manufacturing country, a country that makes it in America. And I have talked to the National Association of Manufacturers, the Chamber of Commerce, and organized labor. This is an agenda item that will bring labor and management, business and workers together to cooperate so that America will continue not only to make it in America, but do so in an expanding way rather than a shrinking way. We're doing some growth in the last few months, last year, last 2 years, last 3 years, but not enough. We can do more. Make it in America is the agenda for the future. I thank the gentleman for yielding.
Thank you very much. Our colleague from the great state of New York and Schenectady.
Representative Garamendi, thank you again. Look, I am ecstatic about the choice of Jeff Immelt by the President, the CEO of GE, to be the chair of the Council on Jobs and Competitiveness. We can probably remove a lot of the struggle that occurs on this House floor by listening to the business minds out there that will advise us about the strength we can provide to create jobs through invention and innovation. Here is a voice that's highly respected. He is tremendously strong in his beliefs in America manufacturing again, and so we must let those voices speak and resonate in this discussion, in this dialogue on where we go, how we build our economy. The President made it very clear. He spent his first couple of years stopping the bleeding of the recession. We're losing 750 to 800,000 jobs a month, 8.2 million jobs lost to this economy. Now our assignment is to plan strategically the growth of jobs. What is sustainable? What is sustainable? Manufacturing, because it incorporates from the trades people over to the PhDs. Everyone has a shot at that economy. It's the muscle we need. It's the American know-how. It's the American intellect. And I thank you again for bringing us together this evening.
Thank you, gentleman from New York. Let's hear what New Jersey has to say.
Thank you, my colleague. I'm really excited about the President's speech tomorrow because I know he's going to stress the whole idea of investment and innovation. And you know, he talks about the fact that that right now many of the corporations in this country are actually sitting on a lot of profit. I mean, in the last year or so, many of them have actually made quite a bit of money. And we want them to reinvest that money in creating private sector jobs here. But one of the points he makes, and this is, you know, I talked a little bit about it tonight, is that the federal government has to incentivize all of this. In other words, you know, I used an example with the drug companies that the federal government, by doing some research on new drugs, can incentivize the drug companies in my district to do more and create more jobs. But there's also an educational component to it as well. You know, we need to do more in terms of education. It's no surprise that in the middle of this pharmaceutical industry in my district sits Rutgers University. And there's a lot of money through the Stimulus Act, for example, that went to Rutgers to do R&D that is then taken up by the drug industry. So it's part of a whole package, and I'm very excited about it, and I just want to thank the gentleman again for all that he's done on this.
Thank you very much for joining us. Ms. Lee, why don't you take a minute, and I'll take a minute. We'll wrap this thing up.
Thank you so very much. I just thought of something that I did want to add to the discussion. First of all, GE is an inherently American company, and so I applaud the selection that allows a creator to move forward to create jobs for all of America. But I want to keep in mind that manufacturing is the employer of all people, women, the persons with college educations, those who are in the trades, men and young people. So families can be hired by manufacturing. It's particularly important to me that women have an equal opportunity, particularly since we passed the pay equity bill in the last Congress. But finally, I also look forward to small, medium, minority and women-owned businesses partnershiping with large businesses to create jobs, because small businesses and minority-owned businesses can create jobs and are part of the infrastructure of jobs. So if the President speaks tomorrow, I hope he speaks for all of America, that all will have an opportunity to retrieve the dream by the opportunity to make it in America. And I thank the gentleman for having us this evening.
We've always thought of America as being the land of opportunity, and it has to be the land of opportunity for everyone in this country, wherever they may be, whatever their status may be. And we know that if we're able to rebuild the manufacturing base in America, small companies, large companies, entrepreneurs and inventors will all participate in it. So the Make It in America effort will be a bipartisan effort. And if we put our minds to it, it will be a successful effort. And America, once again, will be the leadership place. Mr. Speaker, we yield back our time. We thank you.
Gentleman yields back. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 5, 2011, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Carter, is recognized for 60 minutes as a designee of the Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Set that up right there. Okay, thank you. And I thank the Speaker for allowing me this time. I'm pleased that I can bring up some issues that I think are important. That the title of this is the EPA's War on Texas, but this is about a lot more than Texas. I think that most people probably don't realize that a lot of the rules and laws that, especially if they're in business, but even in your own personal life, that seem to touch closest to home, you think they were done by a vote of this Congress in some form or fashion where we decided that this was good for whatever the rule is for your life or for your business or for the good of our nation. But in fact, many of these rules actually come from regulatory agencies. These agencies are given rule-making power, and those rules actually have the power of law. And so a body of employees of the United States, and a few of them are political appointees, depending on the agency. Some of them are appointed each term by the administration, but most of these people are civil servants who work for civil service in these agencies. And there are agencies across this city across this land that take certain sections of our lives and make rules about them. And the rules are given, the rulemaking authority is given them to them by Congress. And the EPA is one of those agencies, the Environmental Protection Agency. And a situation has arisen in Texas which is not only about Texas, but it's about America. And I want to, the last couple of years I've been talking about the rule of law and the fact that we try to set up a system in this nation that has basic fairness and that there are certain things that are right and certain things that are wrong. And when we do that, we don't expect one group to impose its will upon another group inappropriately. But what has happened to Texas, I would argue, is an overstepping of a regulatory agency. And to do this, to talk about this, I'm going to have to start off by giving you, so that you understand it not only affects the lives of Texans, but it directly affects the lives of 13 other states immediately, and potentially every state in this union. In the last 4 years, we have been having an ongoing debate and discussion both at committee level and on this floor about the effect of carbon emissions upon the environment. And there has been an ongoing debate as to whether or not there's such a thing as global warming. That term is now, because the globe doesn't seem to be warming up very much, has turned to climate change, and also because of some kind of falsely manipulated facts concerning global warming, the term has gone to climate change. But there are those good-meaning people in this Congress who believe that carbon emissions are the new deadly medicine for this country, and if we don't do away with them, it's going to destroy our ability to live on this planet. They think it's that, and Al Gore and others are the lead folks on this. and they think it's very important. And that debate has been going on now for 4 to 6 years in this Congress, and an attempt has been made to pass what's called cap-and-trade legislation. And in fact, by one vote, I believe it was, cap-and-trade under the Democrat administration of the last session of Congress was passed out of this House. Cap-and-trade went nowhere in the Senate, and so it never became law. But its purpose was to cap the emissions and tax folks accordingly. And that's very simplified. It was much more complex than that. But it basically, this Congress, made up of the Senate and House, rejected as a unity the concept of cap and trade. The Environmental Protection Agency decided that even though pretty much America had spoken that cap and trade or carbon emissions were not something that they wanted to impose harshness upon folks about, they decided, well, we don't care what they want. We want the carbon emissions. So they, starting in December of, I believe, last year, they started issuing new regulations about carbon emissions. And then they started passing them on through the Clean Air Act to the various states. Now, I'm telling you this because it's going to have a direct effect on your life. Every member of Congress here and every person that might be watching someplace else this discussion will see that when you start talking about what is maybe happening in Texas, you have to realize that as you watch the price of gasoline go up at your pump, you have to realize that there can be a direct relationship between what's going on in the market and what happens to the prices for the American consumer. Here's what has happened in Texas. When they created the Clean Air Act, they gave the EPA the ability to promulgate rules and standards for air quality. But the Act specifically says that the local authority and the states have a better means of policing up this Act than the federal government, so the implementation of the rules of the standards set by EPA will be done by the states rather than the federal government, and each state is to come up with a plan. And that bill was passed, I believe, in 74, 76, something like that. Anyway, it was in the 70s. And it had nothing to do with carbon. It had to do with noxious gases and other really bad sources, things that were getting into our air and reducing the air quality, and the standards were important. And each state had the ability to structure their permitting system to fit the needs of their state and then submit that permitting system to the EPA for approval. And the EPA would say, yeah, I think that's a good system, or no, we don't think it is a good system. One of the things that happened when they put together this Clean Air Act and set these emission standards was that there was what they call a grandfather clause. And companies that were already in existence long before the time of the passing of this Act were grandfathered out of the Act. So basically some of these big refineries, electricity power plants, manufacturing facilities, automobile plants had been around long enough that they were not going to be, they would be grandfathered in some certain areas on these emission standards and the requirement for permitting under the law. That was just the way this act was written. So Texas had a lot of, Texas is the largest energy producing and energy manufacturing state in the United States and has the largest refinery capacity in the United States. I used to could name the number of refineries in Texas, but I'm afraid I'd fall way short today. But needless to say, there are a multitude of refineries and chemical manufacturing facilities just in the Houston area alone, and in Corpus Christi and in other parts of our state. Both great gigantic refineries and mid-sized and small refineries and manufacturing facilities. And they're all dealing with basically the petrochemical industry, the oil and gas industry, is the base product that they are refining, manufacturing things from, and so forth. So in Texas, looking at what it would take not only to clean up the industries that would fall under the Act, which would be the newly permitted industries, but also would start to police up the folks that could get out under a grandfather clause, police up those facilities too, got together with the people in Texas got together and they came up with a concept called what's the word? Flex permitting. And here's the way it works. Let's just take a refinery. Baytown has a gigantic refinery that I have visited. They passed a rule that says there's lots of sources of emissions from some form or fashion inside of a refinery. Come from a little thing the size of a faucet to a great big smokestacks. Can be emitting something into the air. And so what we want them to do is take that site and reduce their emissions down to the standard that is required by EPA. And so we're going to let them, so long as their site reduces emissions and meets the goals set up by the Clean Air Act, not every individual place that emits will have to have a permit, but just one permit to cover the whole site. And then as the site reduces its emissions, that all falls under one permit. It's called a flex permit. So it allows the refinery to go in, fix this first, and then fix this second, and this third, and this fourth, and find the big ones, the big bad ones first, and fix those, and then work down to fix the plant. And by the way, there's a recent letter from the EPA saying that Texas has met and exceeded the standards under this flex permitting. But then along comes greenhouse gases, and they pass the rule about carbon emissions. And they say now you have to put that under your permitting system. And the other states were all kind of, the 13 states plus Texas were kind of taken back by this, but Texas said no way. We don't think you should be imposing carbon emission standards on us when the Congress refused to impose these standards. And they, as I understand it, started contesting this in the court. So here's where the rub comes in. The EPA then announces to Texas, we don't approve your flexible permitting system, and every industry in your state is now out of compliance, and you're going to have a new permitting system, and we're taking over how that's going to work. Even though the Act says Texas or any state shall be people who administer there. Now, you may say, well, that's not too bad. There's a kicker here. Texas created this permitting system in 1994. And since that time, they have been asking EPA to tell them yes or no. Do you approve it or do you don't approve it? Tentatively, they sort of said, well, we'll approve it. But we're going to study it and look at it. 15 years this flexible permitting system has been in place. And now, as the dispute over carbon emissions comes along, to batter Texas into compliance, they have depermitted the whole state. They've announced they depermitted the whole state. Now, the state went to court and at least got a stay on that temporarily. But think about that. If you had something that you were doing that the government said, now we'll have to approve that to do it, and you say, fine, here's what we're doing, would you please approve it or disapprove it? And they waited 15 years to do it. And then when they announced they're disapproving, they say, and oh, by the way, we plan to go back and fine you for the last 15 years for carbon emissions. That's what I understand it's going to be. Something is wrong with this picture. I'm joined with my good friend and fellow judge, Louis Gohmert from Texas, and I'd like to hear his take on this, and if I got anything wrong, he can tell me about it.
Well, thank you. I appreciate your yielding. And not only do you not have anything wrong, but the Clean Air Act that the EPA is supposedly acting under, but they're actually violating, stipulates that pollution control is, quote, the primary responsibility of states and local government, unquote. And while the National EPA Office is supposed to set the overall priorities, states are supposed to have, under this bill that they're supposedly acting under, the states have considerable leeway in their, quote, implementation plans, unquote. That's what the states are supposed to do. And for all these years, when the EPA all of a sudden changes their instructions, states are normally given 3 years, because what we're talking about is when the EPA says now or we shut down, you're talking about jobs. And I realize this is all part of the President's war on jobs, and it's working well. First, the moratorium in the Gulf of Mexico has really decimated Louisiana and many of the Gulf states as he's declared this war on jobs and eliminated so many jobs there in the Gulf region. But what is happening here, as you freeze out refineries, as you declare war on drilling and activity in the Gulf of Mexico, we're now starting to see that effect on everybody else. And it's one thing to stand up and say, and I'm sure we'll hear tomorrow night about how the President cares so much about the working poor in America, and that's what he's out for. But the trouble is, don't watch what is said, watch what's done. And as we watch the price of gasoline continue to go up and up and up, the people that are most devastated by that are not the massive companies that can pass these costs on. They're the people that are trying to get to those jobs, that have jobs left. So those that hadn't already lost their jobs are going to have to deal with this problem. But the EPA, the regulation chief, Gina McCarthy, just a couple of weeks ago sent notice to Texas saying she had no choice but to seize control of the permitting. I mean, this is the federal government just deciding that even though the bill under which she is acting says the states and local government have primary control, she's decided to seize control. This is the federal government at its worst, at its most dictatorial, doing what democracy says you will not do because they couldn't pass the bill, and now they're coming on and doing this with a totalitarian dictatorship. Now, might as well put czar beside Gina McCarthy's name. She's the latest czar. Just hadn't called her that because the name's become unpopular. But now that she seized control of the state and local permitting under the Act, she noted that, quote, statements in the media, unquote, by Texas officials and their legal challenges to EPA's greenhouse gases, but she cited no legal basis for the takeover. And what's more just really offensive is the fact that what, in essence, they're saying is in 1992, according to this Wall Street Journal article, 1992, before there was ever any regulation of this horrible carbon dioxide, carbon emission, and unfortunately, Gina McCarthy, as she says anything, she's a pollutant. She's a polluter. We need to shut down polluters like folks that are breathing out carbon dioxide. You know, it used to be a joke, Judge, that the government has gotten so overreaching that the next thing they're going to regulate the air you breathe. And now we're here. And that's what's happening. But in 1992, there was no carbon dioxide concerns. And now they're using the fact that in 1992 Texas was not regulating carbon dioxide as a reason to take over what the Clean Air Act says must be done by the states and local government. So it's pretty ridiculous. The Wall Street Journal says these words: the takeover was sufficiently egregious that the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals issued an emergency stay on Thursday, suspending the rules pending judicial review. One particular item in need of legal scrutiny is the permitting takeover as an interim final rule that is not open to the normal and Clean Air Act mandated process of public notice and comment. As the article says, so much for transparency in government. But I guess when you declare a war on jobs, you declare a moratorium on drilling activity, you devastate the hard-working folks in America that are trying to produce energy, and what that didn't kill, then you turn right around and take over control of state environmental responsibilities so that you can finish going through with your war on jobs. I yield back to my friend.
And you know, this flex permit's whole purpose was to use common sense and meet the environmental standards without shutting down facilities and losing jobs. That's why they came up with the flex permit. It allowed them, if they met the standards, to do the repairs and fixes in integral parts and not stop until the whole thing is in compliance and have a permit for every faucet in the building that needs to be adjusted or fixed. But rather let them fix the problem as it goes along. And we are the model for meeting the Air Quality Act, the model. I mean, most states aren't in as good a compliance as the state of Texas under the flex permit system. And yet, exactly as my colleague has pointed out, because of this carbon emissions dictatorship that is being, and because they're saying, you will do as I say or else, the position that's being taken by this czar from the EPA, Texans are sort of kind of people that just bow up when people say that like that, and so we said no. And we're in this fight. And I think we're in the fight to win, because I think anybody would say it would be totally unfair for EPA to sit and ponder their duty to approve a plan and spend 15 years looking at it and not do anything with it, and it's meeting its standards, and all of a sudden, bingo, because of this, they are taking over our permitting. I am very pleased to be joined by a gentleman that is probably the most knowledgeable man in Congress about the workings of this particular act, Mr. Joe Barton, former chairman of the Energy and Commerce Committee and a ranking member of the Energy and Commerce Committee, and now our Texas expert on all things energy and all things environmental. Mr. Barton, I'll yield you so much time as you choose to.
Well, thank you, Congressman Carter, and I want to thank you and Congressman Gohmert and some of the other Texans who may have been here before I got here. I've been at a Young Guns dinner, which is why I'm late, but I did not want to fail to take advantage of this opportunity. I want to thank you for hosting this special order. I want to kind of set the predicate here in terms of those kind words that Judge Carter just said about me. I've been in the Congress 26 years. I've been on the Energy and Commerce Committee 24 years. I have been a congressional observer or delegate at large to all the major global warming climate change conferences called COPs, Council of Parties. I was at Kyoto when Vice President Gore came over and made his famous speech, and then on behalf of President Clinton agreed to sign the Kyoto Accord, which the U.S. Senate never took up. Most recently, I was a part of the congressional delegation that then Speaker Nancy Pelosi took to Copenhagen last year, where President Obama came and pleaded that there be a conference agreement, which then Secretary of State Hillary Rodham Clinton agreed to fund with with dollars that the United States government didn't have. So I was at Buenos Aires. I mean, I've been all the major conferences as a congressional observer or delegate. I've chaired dozens of hearings on global warming, authored bills, was an original co-sponsor, and passed the helped vote for and support the Clean Air Act amendments in 1990. So I've been involved in this issue for a number of years. Let me say this. CO2 is not a pollutant under the criteria put forward by the Clean Air Act. It's not one of the named criteria pollutants like SO2 or ozone. It is necessary for life as we know it. The term greenhouse gas, if you just think what a greenhouse is, self-enclosed, in this case the world, and the greenhouse gases are what create the atmosphere and help trap the heat so that life can exist. CO2 is a trace gas. It's about 1/10 of 1% of the atmosphere. Man-made CO2, called anthropogenic CO2, is, I don't know the exact percentage of the total, but it is less than 50%. So what has happened in the last 10 to 15 years is this theory of global warming and climate change needed a bogeyman, and they chose CO2, and they have developed these models that show as CO2 levels rise in the atmosphere over time, the temperature rises. It is a fact that CO2 is rising, but it is not necessarily a fact that that rise is causing temperature to rise. In fact, there's quite a bit of data that would indicate that CO2 rises as a consequence of temperature rising, not so it is a follower, not a leader in that. So in any event, this administration, the Obama administration, when they came into office in January of 2009, began a process or accelerated a process to determine that CO2 was a danger to the atmosphere, a danger to the health of the U.S. population. And they, within 90 days, issued an endangerment finding where they said that since CO2 was a danger to public health, they had the right to regulate CO2, and they began to promulgate these proposed regulations. Now, what does that have to do with the special order this evening? The Environmental Protections Agency has made a decision, and I think a political decision, to be punitive towards Texas, and has gone down, and I'm sure Judge Carter and Judge Gomert have pointed out that they've revoked over 100 existing air quality permits, some of which that have been on the books since the 1990s, for sites and facilities in Texas. Those permits are for more than CO2. They actually are required by the Clean Air Act to regulate SO2 and NOx and ozone, things of this sort. They've revoked all of those. They have also, the EPA, has also issued, I don't know the right word, Judge, threats, warnings to the state of Texas that Texas must begin to implement some of these proposed regulations on CO2. And in both cases, I think the EPA is acting without the law being on their side. And in the case of the CO2 regulations, I'm very confident they're acting without the science on their side. So, what those of us that represent Texas here in the Congress, in conjunction with our governor, lieutenant governor, the Texas House, the Texas Senate, and the Attorney General of Texas are saying is, before we go any further, let's see what the real facts are. Let's see, has Texas, as a regulatory entity through the Texas Council of Environmental Quality, TCEQ, failed in its obligation under the Clean Air Act to implement the terms of that act? I think the answer is Texas has not failed. I think the answer is, if you look at the record, air quality and the criteria pollutants that are specifically regulated by the Clean Air Act is improving in Texas. We have 2 or 3 or 4, I guess. We have the DFW is a non-attainment area, El Paso is a non-attainment area, Houston, Harris County is a non-attainment area, and Beaumont, Port Arthur, I believe, are still listed as a non. So we have 4 areas that have been in non-attainment under the specific criteria of the Clean Air Act. In all 4 of those, the state of Texas has submitted what are called state implementation plans, SIPs, and those have been accepted with one, I think with one exception, by the EPA regionally and nationally. And under those SIPs, air quality is improving. And if the EPA were not to keep changing the standard, we would be in attainment in all 4 regions. But each time we've gotten close in the DFW area, for example, to being in attainment, they have tightened or changed the standard and said that we're in non-compliance. So what we're doing this evening under Judge Carter and Judge Gomert's leadership is saying, let's begin to have a debate about what the facts are. And the first fact that everybody watching this and listening on the floor needs to know is air quality in Texas is improving. The TCEQ, Texas legislature, has done an outstanding job of implementing the terms and conditions which we have passed here in Washington. Number 2, the state of Texas, working with industry, has adopted a flexible permitting program where we work with industry and say, here's the standard you need to meet, here are the various ways you can meet it, let's work together. And that's worked very well. Compliance costs in Texas are below the national average. Industry sees that. Industry is coming to Texas. People are moving to Texas for its quality of life. And I'm sure y'all pointed out that Texas has led the nation in job creation. Texas has led the nation in, or one of the leading states in terms of population increase. Now, you cannot be doing all those good things and then be derelict in air quality if, in fact, air quality is improving and water quality is improving. So we want a dialogue on what the facts are, both on the criteria pollutants under the Clean Air Act and on CO2, one of which is a greenhouse gas. And I would hope, Congressman, that we do more of these special orders, that we even do some of these in Texas. And I can assure you, on the Energy and Commerce Committee, which I am a senior member, I have encouraged our current chairman, Mr. Upton, and our subcommittee chairman, Mr. Whitfield, and Mr. Stearns, and Mr. Shimkus, to hold hearings, bring witnesses on both sides from Texas, bring our friends at the EPA, both up here and in Dallas, come up, and let's put the facts on the table. And then let's see what laws, if any, need to be changed. I am already a co-sponsor of a bill that would make it explicit that CO2 is not a regulated pollutant under the Clean Air Act and should not be. I'm not saying at some point in time we may not need to issue a standard on CO2 if it's proven that it is a harm to public health, but until that time it should not be regulated under the Clean Air Act. It was never intended to be. And we think the EPA is wrong to keep insisting that it should be. So, again, I want to thank you, Judge, and thank you, Judge, for this special order. I'm glad to be here and participate.
You know, reclaiming my time, I thank you, Mr. Barton, for coming here and talking to this. Joe Barton really has been dedicating his life to these types of issues for his long tenure in Congress. But I always wonder, sometimes people back home are sitting around saying, so what does this mean to me? Well, I'm speculating, okay? I'm only speculating, but let me say something that I think everybody agrees. The last time we had a spike in the price of gasoline, it started, I think everybody points to how it started. It started when they had a refinery fire in Illinois. And all of a sudden, the speculators said, whoa, they got a reduced refining capacity in the oil and gas industry right now. But they shut down about half that plant in Illinois. And all of a sudden, we started to see the futures start to move on oil. And that was the kickoff of $5 gasoline in some parts of the country. Why? Because the speculators say, well, if refinery capacity is reduced, gasoline's going to be in more short supply. Futures, I can buy now, sell later. I can make money off this commodity. And the price started up. Other things that happened then, speculators, all that can be talked about. But it started, everybody says, when there was a fear of reduced refining capacity, because right about that same time, we had the hurricanes, which reduced refining capacity over in New Orleans. Now, what's happened since this whole thing started right here, which could reduce, you remember that Texas has the largest amount of refineries anywhere in the United States. Mr. Barton, if I could ask you, what percentage of the refining is in Texas? It's a pretty good percentage of the national refining, you know?
It's about two-thirds.
About two-thirds. About two-thirds of the refining capacity is in Texas. And all of a sudden, as this dispute between EPA and Texas rises its ugly head, and we see that the EPA is taking over this permitting, and industry itself is saying, look, we just want to know what to do. We are at a loss of what to do, and we're willing to work. Their industry is saying to them, tell us what the new permit is, tell us how to do this, what's going to happen, and there's a lawsuit pending and all this stuff. Now the speculators, I think, are starting to say, price may be going up again. You tell me, has the price of gasoline gone up in the last 3 months? Does it look like it's going to continue? I'm not saying this is the cause, but I think I could argue it's one of them. And this is what Texas does with industry is the perfect example of government and industry working to fix a problem together. That's what we thought we were going to get from the Obama administration when he started out. Instead, we have government working against industry in this present administration, and because of that, we start to see it at every level. And by the way, if you think it's just in this particular area, just a little fact. Last year, the federal government issued a total of 3,316 new rules and regulations, an average of 13 rules a day. 78 of the new rules last year were major rules. A major rule is a rule that will result in an annual effect on the economy of $100 million or more, a major increase in costs or prices for consumers, or significant adverse effect to the economy. And we had, just last year, 78 of those rules, plus an additional 3,000 plus more rules that were passed. Now, I bring this all up, and I'll yield to my friend in just a moment, because I want to talk about one of the solutions that we're looking at. It's a little-known thing that is now coming to the forefront. It's called the Congressional Review Act. Back in 1996, under the Contract with America Advancement Act of 1996, as part of the Small Business Regulatory Enforcement Fairness, they created the Congressional Review Act. This is Public Policy Law PL 104-121. It allows the Congress to review every new federal regulation issued by the government agencies and by passage of a joint resolution overrule that regulation. The process is the federal agencies shall, note that word, that means they have to, although I don't think they all do, submit to each House of Congress and to the Comptroller General a comprehensive report on any major proposed rule. Congress has 60, and that's legislative days, to pass a joint resolution of disapproval of any rule. The Senate must vote on the CRA resolution of disapproval within, if 30 members of the Senate approve having a vote. Only 30 members is necessary to have a vote in the Senate. So this is a tool to where we can have, in our small way, be a part of this fight on behalf of Texas. And we will be following this procedure that's set out in this act, and we will be attempting to have and will have a vote on this House floor on this rule. And I think when people hear the taint fire factor in this particular rule, it's going to be a pretty strong vote. I now yield the time to Mr. Gohmert that he wishes to take.
Well, my friend indicates it's not fair for Texas, but as former Chairman of Energy Joe Barton notes, with about two-thirds of the refining capacity for the whole country being in Texas, what this means is, regardless how anybody feels about Texas, I know there are a lot of people that don't care for the state, but regardless of how people feel about it, when two-thirds of the refining for the gasoline they put in their cars is coming from the state of Texas, and the EPA has declared war against Texas, violating the laws of this land in order to politically stick it to Texas, the price that will be paid is by rank-and-file folks across the country. And as we've seen manufacturing, we had colleagues across the aisle talking about jobs. The things that this administration are doing are killing jobs. You know, they were going to create all these jobs, and then they did such a terrible job of creating jobs. In fact, we were going the wrong direction. So then they went to saying, well, we're saving jobs, when the fact is we're driving jobs overseas. We're losing manufacturing jobs constantly. And this very thing we're talking about tonight is one of the reasons. There is so much uncertainty with regard to business in this country. Now, if you want certainty, you could be a friend of this administration, as George Soros is, so his biggest single investment is a drilling company down in South America, and so we loaned them $2 billion, that's with a B, billion dollars to drill offshore off Brazil, but in the meantime, we got a war declared on those who make their living in the Gulf Coast area off drilling, moratorium. People are still not able to drill, and that has affected so many jobs. But when the price of gasoline continues to go shooting up because this administration is doing everything they can to increase the price of energy and make it harder for people to get cheaper gasoline, people are going to make their voices heard. And what I don't think the administration understands is the timing of all this is going to be such that it's going to be coming around in 2012 and really adversely affecting people's pocketbooks, jobs. Employers can't count on the price of fuel being where they need it, and a lot of businesses are saying this is something we can't do business with. The EPA, the uncertainty of the requirements. And what it reminds me, too, is in our Natural Resources Committee, with the Democrats in control, they were always able to bring more witnesses. That's just the way procedure works around here. Whichever party's in the majority, they get to bring more witnesses that'll say what their position is. They brought a witness to the Natural Resources Committee to testify that, gee, we really need to stop drilling off the coast and basically everywhere. But he said there were over 200 million families in the world that make their living from fishing, and if we allow this drilling off the coast to continue, it's going to destroy fishing for all those 200 million families. Well, it was my turn. I pointed out, you'll be glad to know that we heard those things in Texas, I did growing up, that if you allow platforms off our coast, then it's just going to kill off all the fishing off the coast of Texas and in the Gulf. Turns out, I told the witness, he'd be glad to know, that those platforms become an artificial reef. Fish proliferate around those areas. So when you want to go fishing now, they take you out to platforms because it's done so much good for fishing. And I said, and as far as you're concerned about the oil that was leaked after Katrina, not one barrel came from any of those platforms, some of which were totaled. They came from onshore tanks, which really were the place where tankers bringing oil from overseas came in and unloaded it. Some of that was hit by the hurricane and leaked. And he said, well, look, and this is in a nutshell what he said, I guess the real problem is this. If you produce oil or gas onshore, offshore, wherever it is, some point it's going to be burned, and maybe it's in an engine, wherever. That produces carbon. The carbon goes into the air, and eventually the rain brings it down either into the ocean or on the land, and it's washed into the ocean. That puts more carbon in the ocean, and as you have more carbon in the ocean, eventually the pH increases, and eventually, if you keep doing that long enough, the pH will increase enough, everything dies in all the oceans, and so that's when people can't fish. That's what this administration is basing all of their opposition to drilling and production of fossil fuels. We all agree we ought to be moving off of fossil fuels, but if we would allow drilling on federal offshore areas, federal onshore areas, and designate a percentage of that proceeds of our federal royalty to go toward development of alternative fuel, we don't run the jobs off. We don't run the poor folks that are just trying to make it into bankruptcy because they can't afford gasoline, and everybody wins. It doesn't have to be an everybody-lose solution, and I yield back.
Mr. Barton?
I'd like to inquire how much time is remaining in your special order. 14 minutes, because I didn't want to take up too much of your time. Would the gentleman yield to me for
I'd yield to you, Mr.
just
Barton.
a brief comment, because I want to keep reiterating air quality in Texas is improving. It is improving. The Clean Air Act gives the federal government, through the Environmental Protection Agency, the right to preempt states when the states either don't implement the federal regulations on the Clean Air Act, or if the states simply turn it back and ask the federal government to take over. So the EPA does have the right, under certain circumstances, to preempt state implementation. But in this case, I would postulate, and we have, each of you are former judges before you became congressmen, that since the state of Texas has complied and air quality is improving, and there is a debate about whether CO2 should be regulated under the Clean Air Act, which is a separate issue, that the federal government has overstepped its bounds to come in and unilaterally, against the wishes of the state of Texas, to repeal these permits and require that they all be resubmitted, and not only resubmitted, but resubmitted in a very specific way. The state of Texas air quality permitting program has been a flexible, says we will regulate an entire site, and as long as you're under that cap, you can implement new equipment and new procedures as long as your emissions stay the same or go down. And under the Texas flexible permitting program, they have gone down, in some cases as much as 20 to 30%. And this is in a state where population has gone up, where productivity has gone up, where output has gone up. So in my view, the state of Texas, the Texas Council of Environmental Quality, should be getting awards from the federal government, not being punished and not being unilaterally dismissed. So I really respect and thank you, Congressman Carter, for holding this special order. And I'll tell our friends in Texas that may be watching, this special order is not the end. It is simply the beginning.
That's right.
And those of us that support this initiative support it because we believe you can have improving air quality, improving water quality, and increased jobs and economic output. It's not an either-or. It can be a win-win, but if we adopt the EPA's short-sighted, mandatory, very specific command and control attitude, you are, as Congressman Gohmert said, you're going to destroy jobs, destroy the economy, reduce output, and not get any increased environmental quality. I yield back to my distinguished friend.
Thank you for yielding back and reclaiming my time. I believe the governor pointed out that of the million new jobs created in America in the last 5 years, 3 years, something like that, 850,000 of them were created in Texas. We are a dynamic economy, and we're a dynamic economy because we've had the foresight that of all working together to make jobs, to improve the environment by using logical, common sense methods of doing this regulation.
Will the gentleman yield on
I certainly will.
This